Welcome to our continuation of church history. If you look at your syllabus, we're into lecture 3 on as far as the format of the syllabus is concerned. On that lecture 3, which is now lecture 3, again now begins the material for test number 2. That's where the material for test number 2 begins, with the syllabus lecture 3, the Catholic Church, number A there. Well, so far now we've moved down, and we've covered the Catholic Church as far as the designation Catholic is concerned. We've covered the creeds. We talked about 2 of the creeds. There were a number of statements of belief in the early church, creeds. By the word, the Latin word credo means I believe. So a creed is a statement of belief. And we covered the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, 2 of the most important creeds of the early church. Then we took time and we spoke about the canon of the Scriptures, the list of books of the Scriptures and how that canon came about and how it was recognized, and the ultimate canon of the Roman Catholic Church and the Protestant churches as they were affirmed in the 16th century. I also spoke about the standard for canonicity, what were some of the things to look to determine whether or not a book belonged to the list of the sacred writings. Now we begin this section D on your syllabus, lecture 3, the patriarchal system and the importance of Rome. The patriarchal system and the importance of Rome. Now, first of all, let me explain the meaning of the term patriarch. A patriarch was a bishop of an important see, S-E-E, of an important diocese or region of the church. So a patriarch was a bishop. He was a bishop, called a patriarch because he was seen to have a certain superior authority over the whole region, even over other bishops in that region. At least an authority, a primacy you might say, or a place of honor among the other bishops because he was the bishop over the largest city or over the most Christian area of that region. So a patriarch is a bishop who has special honor over other local bishops. A patriarchate is the area over which he is recognized as the patriarch. So I guess all that makes sense. So now we come to the patriarchal system and the growing importance of one of these patriarchs, of one of these bishoprics, namely the Patriarchate of Rome. So now in the development of Christian government, all the bishops of all the cities, great and small, were all recognized as of equal authority. So no bishop had authority over any other bishop. So all the bishops had equal authority in the beginning. But the Bishop of Rome gradually gained authority over all the other bishops in the West, and he became known as the Pope. Now, I'm talking about the bishops of the West. Let me go over to the map and kind of talk about the West as opposed to the East. Okay? So, in the future, now here's the Roman Empire area that we're speaking about. Here's Rome over here. This bishop was to become the most important, eventually, he was to become the most important of all the other bishops. Now, speaking about the east and the west, if we draw an imaginary line down here, just opposite the heel of Italy, run a line here, run it over here. I'm moving the map here with my pointer. Let me move the map a little bit here. Run this line up opposite the heel of Italy and over across the top of the Black Sea and over here. This area over here encompassed in this circle is the east. This is the eastern part of the empire. The western part of the empire is from here over. Is from Macedonia here over to the west, which would include some of North Africa. Okay? And while I'm here at the map, this is Rome here. This is Byzantium here. Byzantium was later to be known as Constantinople after Constantine. Today it is called Istanbul. Rome, Byzantium or Constantinople, Antioch in Syria, Jerusalem, Palestine, and Alexandria in Egypt. We're going to see in a few minutes that these were the major patriarchates of the Christian world. Okay? So that's the difference between the East and the West. So speaking of the East, I'm speaking about Constantinople, Antioch, Jerusalem, Alexandria, Egypt. Speaking about the West, I'm speaking about Rome, and eventually Europe and parts of North Africa, west of Alexandria. Okay? You understand? So that sort of gets us kind of geographically orientated. Now, the Bishop of Rome eventually became known as the Pope. And just as at one time all the bishops were looked upon as having equal authority, likewise, the term Pope, which comes from Papa, meaning father, was a term common to all the bishops. All the bishops at one time were called Pope, was just another name for a bishop. It was like all the elders were bishops at one time, but then the term bishop became selective just for the chief elder. Well, eventually the term Pope, Papa, father, spiritual father, which was common to all the bishops at one time, that term became selective and descriptive only, eventually, of the Bishop of Rome. So I think that's interesting. And the bishops of the important cities, the bishops of the most important cities of the church, as I've already mentioned, were called patriarchs. Patriarchs. And the cities over which they ruled or ministered were Antioch. Now, I believe a map will go up on the screen to show this, these important cities. The cities were Antioch in Syria, Alexandria in Egypt, Jerusalem in Palestine, Constantinople, or Byzantium, and Rome. And of course, Rome was the only patriarchate in the West. That's important. Rome was the only patriarchate in the West. But each of these cities had a special place of honor for one reason or another, one historical reason or another. because of its size, because of its influence, because it was the seat, source of ministry of one of the apostles, whatever it was, had some special basis for honor in the Christian world. So the bishops of these cities became preeminent over all the other bishops. Now, what were the reasons for the special honor that was accorded to the Bishop of Rome? Well, I have 4 reasons here, and you need to know these reasons. The first reason is the antiquity of the Roman Church. The church at Rome is one of the earliest churches of Christianity. After the church began in Jerusalem, the Roman community began early on. So it was one of the earliest Christian churches. And it was honored by Paul. Paul honored that church by his epistle to the Romans. And not only by his epistle to the Romans, but by his presence in Rome. Rome is the only apostolic church in the West. Rome is the only church in the West that has any connection with one of the apostles, and that was Paul. And also it's widely believed that Peter also spent time in Rome. So Rome is the most honored see, you might say, or episcopal seat or bishopric of the West. It's honored not only for its antiquity, but because of the ministry and the labors of Peter and Paul, and also the sufferings of the Christians under Nero. That the Christians in Rome paid a great price. And I just get emotional, I guess, when I say this, but Christianity is priceless in the sense that we can never pay enough. What is exacted of us as Christians should never be thought to be too high a price to pay. You know what the Bible says? The Bible says, buy the truth and sell it not. I believe that's in Proverbs. Buy the truth and sell it not. Pay any price required to live by the truth, but never sell it out for gain, money, fame, position, or any other compromise. The Christians in Rome paid a tremendous price for their faith, especially under the persecutions of Nero that we read about. But they didn't think that the Lord was exacting too high a price for the faith that He gifted them with, and for so great a salvation. Being used as a human torch to light Nero's arena was a small price to pay for the glories of heaven. The Romans were honored for their faith. They were willing to pay the price. Buy the truth. Give all that you have for truth, but sell it not. Rome was also accorded special honor because of its political preeminence. Its political preeminence. It was the most important city in the West. Indeed, it was the capital of the empire. So there's no more important city in all of Roman civilization than the city of Rome itself. That was the city of the emperors. And also, Rome was also recognized as a place of orthodoxy. What's orthodoxy? Remember we said before, ortho means right, dox means teaching. It was a place of right teaching. And Rome just had that reputation. I would trust that Liberty Ministries will always have that reputation for balanced, right teaching, for orthodoxy. It's had that reputation now for 25 years. Certain places just have that reputation for sound, right, balanced teaching. And I trust now that you recognize and feel within yourselves that you are the recipients of an orthodoxy that's been established in the church today. That's how people felt about Rome. That it just had that reputation for being a center of orthodoxy, of right teaching. So because of its size, because of the importance of that bishop, different doctrinal disputes sometimes were taken to Rome. All kinds of disputes for arbitration and for discussion. So these are the reasons for the special honor that was accorded to Rome. Its antiquity as a community, because of the labors of Peter and Paul there and their martyrdom, and because of the testimony of the Christians there, it's a political preeminence, and its recognized orthodoxy. So Rome had a lot of influence, and Irenaeus, who was a bishop in France, in Gaul, and Tertullian, Cyprian, a mid-3rd century bishop in North Africa, they all conceded that Rome had a special importance, and it was a place to be accorded special honor. So in all these circumstances, we see the beginnings of the papacy. Let me go to the board and just jot that down. That word papacy, the beginnings of the papacy. Papacy, it comes from the word pope. It's an ally, you might say, of the word pope. And the papacy is the office of the Bishop of Rome. That's what it is. The papacy, you might say the popacy, see, is the office of the Bishop of Rome. And today, the papacy, this is sort of a funny analogy, I guess, but like circumcision is a symbol, it speaks of the whole law of Moses. You know, speaking of the circumcision, speaking of the whole law, it represents the whole law of Moses. Well, the papacy really today has the connotation of representing the whole government and religious authority of the church. So when we speak of the papacy, we're speaking about the whole government, the whole religious authority, the whole everything of the Roman Church, as headed up by the Bishop of Rome, by the Pope. Okay, so we see the beginnings of this phenomenon, really, this new phenomenon in the church. We see the beginnings of the papacy in this special importance of the city of Rome. And because the city of Rome and because the community, because of the Christian community in Rome has such a special importance and seemed to be especially significant for the reasons that we already said, then its bishop became a person, a bishop of special significance in the church. And one of the ultimate beliefs of the papacy is, related to the papacy, is that the Bishop of Rome, and this is a doctrine that came by gradually. It did not emanate from the teachings of Jesus Christ. But this doctrine on the papacy emerged gradually. It was a development in the church. And that's the doctrine that the Bishop of Rome has by divine right. This is not based in the Scriptures. This is the doctrine of man. But this doctrine developed because of the growing preeminence of the Bishop of Rome, because of what he was bishop of, for all the reasons that we stated. The doctrine of the papacy, if you will, is that the Bishop of Rome has by divine right absolute, supreme jurisdiction over all the other bishops of the church and over all the Christians of the world. That's the central doctrine of the papacy. It's the central fact of the whole government of the Roman Church. That the Bishop of Rome, by divine right, by divine establishment, has absolute, total, supreme jurisdiction over all the other bishops and over all the Christians in the world. Now let's look at some of the claims of the Roman Church about the papacy. And why do we, again, why do we bring up the Roman Church? Because the Roman Church emerged out of New Testament Christianity as a result of new doctrines being brought into the church after the apostolic age, even doctrines that did not square with what was written in the Scriptures. And it emerged out of the New Testament church as such, as the government of the church developed, changed into a government, into a leadership not of apostles but by local bishops who became monarchs or kings, quote unquote, as far as jurisdiction goes, in their own localities. And eventually one became king of all, as it were. One became monarch of all, and that was the Pope. So what are the claims about the Roman Church, about the papacy? First of all, it's the teachings of the Roman Church, Roman Catholic Church, that Jesus appointed Peter not only to a place of honor and leadership and dignity as a leader among the 12 apostles, but also to a place of supreme jurisdiction or supreme right to rule. Jurisdiction is the right to rule. It's the right to make laws. It's being a lawmaker. It's being a lawgiver. That's jurisdiction. Well, the Roman teaching is that Jesus appointed Peter to a place of being a lawmaker, of supreme jurisdiction over the other apostles. And we just have to note that Peter never claimed this for himself. It's clear from the reading of the Scriptures that Peter never claimed this type of position among the other apostles. Certainly Paul never recognized it. Paul never recognized any kind of superiority of, or jurisdiction of Peter over him. Well, I can get into that, but I won't. But of course, Paul publicly corrected Peter, doctrinally corrected Peter. And it was Peter who extended Paul the right hand of fellowship. It was not Paul who extended Peter the right hand of fellowship. So Peter recognized Paul's authority and his call from God. And there's no indication in the Scriptures whatsoever that that Paul was in any way inferior in ministry or place as an apostle to Peter. Paul acted very independently, as a matter of fact, of Peter. Now, the Roman Church also teaches that these privileges that Jesus allegedly gave Peter, primacy of jurisdiction, so forth, were official and they were transferable, that Peter was to transfer this authority to his successor in office. And of course, there's no record of that. So there's no indication of that. There's no record of that in the earliest historical documents concerning the church, which are, of course, the Scriptures. There's no indication of that. Now, Peter was to transfer this authority as the head of the whole church to anybody else. Thirdly, the Roman Church teaches that these privileges of jurisdiction and authority were in fact transferred by Peter to the Bishop of Rome. Well, there's no historical proof of that. There's no historical proof of that. There's some indication, even Harnack, who was the most Protestant of all Protestant theologians, historians, agrees that he believed that Peter spent time in Rome. But there's no historical proof that Peter was even ever recognized as the Bishop of Rome. Paul was in Rome too. And Paul never shows any deference to Peter. So there's a lot of that type of thing that we can't go into. But all these things that the Roman Church claims, they cannot be historically proven. Fourthly, it's been taught that Peter was not only at Rome, probably after 63 AD, but he acted as bishop there until his martyrdom, when he appointed this successor. Of course, there's not the slightest historical guarantee or evidence of such an appointment that Peter ever appointed anybody to be his successor in office as the head of the whole church. There's no historical proof of that whatsoever. For years, the Roman Church held that that Peter was the Bishop of Rome for 25 years. There's no proof of that at all. There's no proof of that at all. What Rome's present position is on that, I'm not so sure, but I think that the Roman historians have backed off of that particular item. Also, fifthly, the Roman Church claims that the bishops of Rome, as the successors in office of Peter, have always exercised and enjoyed a universal jurisdiction over the Christian church. Now, the bishops of Rome have always recognized their universal jurisdiction over the whole church and been recognized by the other bishops as having universal jurisdiction over the whole church. Well, that it is in fact not the case. There's ample evidence that other bishops often disagreed with the Bishop of Rome. He was not recognized. He was not recognized as having jurisdiction over the whole church. He never was recognized as having jurisdiction over the whole church by the church in the East. By the church in the East. Let me go to the map again and repeat. This is the East. The Bishop of Byzantium, Antioch, Jerusalem, Constantinople, this whole area, this part of the church never, ever recognized the man that ruled from this, let me move the map back, the man that ruled from Rome as bishop. These bishops never recognized him as having jurisdiction over them. So it's not an historical fact that the Bishop of Rome always enjoyed universal, the right to rule supreme over the whole church. It's not a fact that he was ever, that he was always recognized. Now, eventually he became recognized by bishops in the West, but not in the East. But not in the East. Okay. We'll talk more about that later about his relationship to the bishops in the East. Okay. So, are you with me? Are we all hanging in there? It's going to get a little more complicated as things go on. But step by step. Now, Rome's claim to primacy is based upon Matthew 16:18. Now, I think I'll just take time and read that from the Word. Matthew 16:18 is probably the most controversial scripture in the entire New Testament. If it's not, it's close to it. But the entire Roman structure of the Roman Church is based upon the Roman Catholic interpretation of Matthew 16:18. And that interpretation justifies the papacy. But that interpretation is not in harmony with the rest of the Scriptures. So we know just from that the interpretation is not correct. And if their interpretation, Matthew 16:18, is not correct, then the whole structure falls to the ground, because it's all based on this. Matthew 16:18, we're all familiar with it. Go back to Matthew 16:17. Jesus replied, "Blessed are..." We'll go back to verse 15. "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" And Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." It's in that scripture that Rome stakes its claim that its bishop is the head of the whole church. Now, but if we read into the scriptures, we see that Christ is the head of the church. Christ is the foundation of the church, not Peter. Peter is one of the builders, but Peter is a part of the foundation with the other apostles and prophets. But Christ is called the foundation. He's called the head. He's called the cornerstone. I want to go back to the scriptures, and we'll see that the church is built upon not the foundation of Peter, but upon the foundation of Christ. First of all, Ephesians 2:20. Ephesians 2:20. All right, Ephesians 2:20. 19. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people, members of God's household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. There's no special mention of Peter there. Peter is not singled out as any unique part of the foundation. He's among the apostles and prophets. He's one of the bricks. But Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone. You know, a cornerstone is such that everything has to line up with the cornerstone. Everything has to be in line with the cornerstone of a building. If things are not in line with the cornerstone, the whole building is crooked. It's a bad foundation, and it's going to fall down. See? So, if anybody's the foundation, it's Jesus Christ. Also, in 1 Corinthians 3:11, 1 Corinthians 3:11. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. Hallelujah. See, if anybody's the rock, the foundation is Jesus Christ. Well, the scriptures go on and on. There are many scriptures that we can quote here to show that the Jesus is the foundation. So what does Jesus mean when he says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church"? Well, the rock, we see from Scripture, the rock, the foundation of the church is Jesus Christ. First of all, it's Jesus Christ. That's all. So Matthew 16:18 is brought into perspective, interpretation by these many other scriptures that show that Jesus Christ is the foundation and the rock. So thou art Peter, and upon this rock, upon this revelation that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, which is tantamount to say that the rock is Christ. The church is based upon the foundation of Jesus Christ. This is the rock upon which Jesus Christ, upon which the church is established. The revelation that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. It's that teaching which is the foundation of the church, which is the same as saying that Jesus Christ, because that teaching is identified with Him, that Jesus Christ is the rock, the foundation. There are those scripture scholars that say, and I'm talking about Protestant scholars, that, and not to get technical, but grammatically in the Greek, the rock can refer to Peter. Thou art Peter, and that's Petros, that's masculine. Upon this Petra, rock, feminine, I built my church. But some hold that the rock is Peter, but the Petros is simply the masculine form of the feminine word rock. And it has to be masculine if it's a man's name. See? If it's a male name, so the form has to be masculine in that case, even though the word is feminine. So, if that be the case, and it can be persuasively argued among Greek scholars that thou art Peter, and upon this rock, meaning Peter, I will establish my church. If that be the case, then in the light of all the other scriptures, Peter is the rock, not as the foundation of the church, but only in a secondary sense, as he is the embodiment and the representatives of all those who have the faith that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God. Which goes back to the same thing, that the rock, the foundation, is Jesus Christ, and the revelation that He is the Son of the living God. No man is the foundation of the church. No man is the rock of the church. Only Jesus Christ is the rock upon which the church is established. So, Peter, like I said, represents those who have this belief, who have faith in Jesus. And whatever privileges, Peter did have a leadership among the apostles, but whatever privileges God spoke to Peter, He spoke to Peter as a representative. Not uniquely to himself, but as a representative of the other apostles. Indeed, as a representative of all Christians, really. You know, when he said, I give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. That was not exclusively to Peter. Peter doesn't have any special authority, didn't have any special spiritual authority over all the other apostles just because Jesus gave him that promise, just because he gave him the keys. He was speaking to Peter as a representative. Because in Matthew 18, Jesus gave exactly the same authority to the other apostles, which shows that in Matthew 16, Peter is not being spoken to uniquely, but as a representative of others. And Matthew 18, it's clear from the context that what he gave the apostles in Matthew 18, he gives to the whole church. So that kind of wipes out the primacy of Peter. And it's also notable that Peter never acted as the head of the whole church. There's no indication that he was ever recognized as the head of the whole church by the Christians of the first century, much less the other apostles. And also, as I said, Paul didn't give any recognition at all, didn't give any evidence that he believed that Peter was the head of the whole church. But this became the prevailing view, and it became the prevailing view in the West, in the western part of the church, never in the East, which is very significant, because if this was this jurisdiction of Peter, supreme jurisdiction, was in fact the intention of Christ, and if this jurisdiction had its origin in the mouth of Jesus Christ before the apostles, why was it never recognized? Why was it never believed by the whole church, except over in Rome, where the Bishop of Rome reigned? I think that's very significant. If this was such a great revelation, why was all the church blind to it, except Rome and those that came under its influence in the West? So I think that's very, very valid, legitimate, and a significant point. In almost every dispute, especially in the West, churches began to appeal to the Church of Rome because of its orthodoxy and so forth. And by 185, Irenaeus. Now, Irenaeus is a bishop in Gaul or in France. So he's in the Western camp, say. But he taught about the last quarter of the 2nd century that all churches should agree with Rome. Rome is a good church, Orthodox church. And he felt that all churches should agree with Rome. And of course, this was one more step to building the image of Rome as the head of the entire church. By 200 A.D., Rome was the most influential of, by 200 A.D., Rome was the most influential center of Christianity in the entire church. That was because of the decline of importance of the cities in Asia Minor, including Antioch. So Rome, I believe because, more than anything else, because it was the capital city of the empire, Rome became the most important city of Christianity, East and West, very much so because of its political significance. And so eventually the claims of the Bishop of Rome, the claims of the Church of Rome to spiritual supremacy, those claims were accepted in the western part of the church. They were accepted in the western part of the church, but not without opposition. There was always some opposition, but eventually all the opposition faded away. And the church over which he would rule and reign with supreme spiritual jurisdiction would become known as the Roman Catholic Church. See, we spoke about the old Catholic Church, the Catholic Church that came out of the 2nd century, where the universality of the church was being, the Catholicity, small c, universality of the church was being recognized. So today historians call that the Old Catholic Church, but eventually Old Catholic changes into Roman Catholic, and that refers to the church in the West, the church over which the Bishop of Rome had supreme jurisdiction and authority. So now this brings us to Constantine the Great. Let me go to the board and write his name down. Constantine. Okay, Constantine the Great. He is seen, Constantine the Great is seen as the first Christian emperor. And he's a man of tremendous influence, and he even considered himself a bishop, like an external bishop. He was a politician, but he considered himself a bishop in the church. He appointed himself, acknowledged himself as a bishop in the church for its external affairs. So we'll get into Constantine here and begin to read from Philip Schaff's book, Volume 3. Constantine the Great, reputed to be the first Christian emperor. Now, I want to take a few minutes and read out of Philip Schaff's history book different accounts about Constantine, different parts of his life and so forth. And I want to just to remind you that as I do reading out of any history book, you don't have to sit there and try to transcribe it like some kind of a court reporter. All right, just kind of sit back and enjoy it, and if you want to take some notes, that's fine. But I'm not going to test you on the intricacies of what I read, because that comes out like too fast. And you'll be tested on the lecturer, but I read just to spice it up and to add detail in an accurate and more rapid way. And I'll do some commenting on the reading as I go, and if there's anything particular that I want you to remember test-wise, then I'll tell you. But just relax while I'm reading. Just relax, and please don't get uptight because I'm reading so fast. Okay? So I begin with Constantine the Great, and I begin to read about him out of Philip Schaff's history book. It says, Constantine, the first Christian Caesar, the founder of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire, and one of the most gifted, energetic, and successful of the Roman emperors, was the first representative of the imposing idea of a Christian theocracy. So he had the idea of a union of church and state, really, and he used the Christian religion to unify his empire. That seems to be historically recognized as part of his motivation. He was the founder of Constantinople. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. It says, speaking of a Christian theocracy, or of that system of policy which assumes all subjects to be Christians, connects civil and religious rights, and regards church and state as the two arms of one and the same divine government on the earth. So this is what the church was getting into under Constantine, that all society was one, and it was a theocracy. God ruled. That's what a theocracy is, the rule of God over society. But God rules politically through the government and spiritually through the church. And of course that brings up inevitable conflict between church and state, who's got jurisdiction over what. And this idea of theocracy was more fully developed by his successors and animated the whole Middle Age. So now this helps us understand the political religious climate of the Middle Ages, and is yet working in various forms in these latest times. Now, from the year 313, Constantine placed himself in close connection with the bishops and made peace and harmony his first object in certain heresies, the settlement of certain heresies, and applied the term Catholic to the church in all official documents. And as his predecessors were the supreme pontiffs, or the supreme high priest, or the heathen religion of the empire, so he desired to be looked upon as a sort of bishop, as a universal bishop of the external affairs of the church. So understand that the Roman emperors were the high priests. They were the high priests of the heathen religion. So Constantine, as the emperor, was looked upon as the high priest of the heathen religion. So in that vein, he also considered himself as a high priest of the Christian religion, as a bishop, see, for the external affairs of the church. All this by no means from mere self-interest, but for the good of the empire, which now shaken to its foundations and threatened by barbarians on every side, could only by some new bond of unity be consolidated and upheld until at least the seeds of Christianity and civilization could be planted among the barbarians themselves. The Roman Empire was being threatened from the east and from the north by barbarian tribes of people, by relatively uncivilized tribes of people. And Constantine saw this, so he tried to bring unity and strength into the empire. And he wanted to unify the whole empire into one. And he sought to use Christianity to unify the Roman Empire. It says about him, it says, at first Constantine, like his father, reverenced all the gods as mysterious powers, especially Apollo, the god of the sun. Not that only, but also he enjoined regular consultations with soothsayers and public misfortunes according to ancient heathen usage. And even later, he placed his new residence, Byzantium, under the protection of the god of the martyrs and the heathen goddess of fortune. And down to the end of his life, he retained the title and the dignity of a Pontifex Maximus, or high priest of the heathen hierarchy. His coins bore on the one side the letters of the name of Christ, and on the other the figure of the sun god, and the soul, and the inscription, Sol Invictus, which I believe means sun conquers. Of course, these inconsistencies may be referred also to policy and accommodation to the Toleration Edict of 313. Nor is it difficult to adduce parallels of persons who, in passing from Judaism to Christianity, from Romanism to Protestantism, have so wavered between the old and the new position that they might be claimed by both. So Constantine, called the first Christian emperor, but he was, he was involved in heathenism and Christianity, really at the same time. He was like in between two worlds. And he did not formally renounce heathenism and did not receive baptism until in 337 he was laid upon his bed of death. So it wasn't until his deathbed that he renounced heathenism and received baptism. And of course we hope at that time he actually did receive Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. We know that there's only one way, and we trust that at least by the end he was a born-again Christian. God knows the answer to that question. And then it speaks about his moral character. He had many great traits of justice and traits of justice, and he tried to improve conditions and so forth. He was one of the most influential Roman emperors of all time. Yet at the same time, he had some faults too. He was by no means a perfect individual. Okay, it says Christianity did not produce in Constantine a thorough moral transformation, and he was concerned more to advance the outward social position of the Christian religion than to further its inward mission. Which, well, he's a politician, so I think we can understand that. Not a decided, pure, and consistent character, he stands on the line of transition between two ages and two religions, and his life bears plain marks of both. When at last on his deathbed he submitted to baptism with the remark, "Now let us cast away all duplicity," he honestly admitted the conflict of the two antagonistic principles which swayed his private character and his public life. So he played the game on both sides of the fence. He was a bishop for the external affairs of the church by his own admission, not by, of course he called church council, he called together church council and so forth, but he was like a self-appointed bishop, in his words, for the external affairs of the church. But he played both sides of the fence. He represented the heathen religion, and he represented the Christian religion. Well, his Edict of Milan that we've spoken about already, 313, was a transition point in the development of Christianity from being a persecuted religion to becoming the religion of the state. Now, he transferred, let me go to the map over here. He transferred the seat of the Roman Empire from Rome. He transferred it to Byzantium, right here, Byzantium, way over here in the east. He transferred it. We will use the term the Byzantine Empire, or Byzantium, or the Byzantine Empire. That is after the word Byzantium. That includes the East that we spoke about. This will become known as the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so if I use that term, I'm talking about the East, and the center of government is Byzantium. Well, Constantine moved out of Rome as the emperor. He moved out of Rome. He moved his capital to Byzantium to build a glorious city for his own honor. And so Byzantium became known as Constantinople. Constantinople, after Constantine. Constantinople means the city of Constantine. So Byzantium and Constantinople, called Istanbul today, are the same. It's the same identical city. So Constantine moved from Rome to Byzantium, rebuilt the city into a glorious capital, and he began to rule the empire from now what is to be called Constantinople. And so Constantinople now will become the center of the empire. But something happened here in Rome. When he went from Rome to Constantinople, this left the Bishop of Rome as the most influential person in the West. Now the emperor was not overshadowing him. The bishop in Rome now became the most outstanding, powerful, and influential person in the western part of the empire. Now, that would kind of get us orientated here. And so the power and the prestige of the Bishop of Rome is now increased because Constantine moved all his political machinery over to Byzantium, to call it Constantinople. We said that he was baptized a few days before his death. It is non-biblical, but Roman Catholic theology, that baptism cleanses a person from sin. And so the Greek and the Russian churches, which are very similar to Roman Catholic in their theology, call him a saint. Constantine is acknowledged as a saint, as a heavenly saint today, by the Greek church, Russian church in the East, which is similar to Catholic church in the West. We'll see how all that came about. But he's called great by the Roman church, but he never was canonized a saint by the Roman church. All right, there was one interesting incident in his life, his vision of the cross, which is the story of why he became a Christian. It was while he was on the march to defeat Maxentius, one of the co-regents of the Roman Empire, and Constantine came down over the Alps to fight Maxentius, and there's the story of his encounter with a vision of the cross in the skies. And rather than read this, I'll just go through it with you. As he came down into Italy to fight Maxentius, whom he would defeat, and ultimately, because of that battle, he would become the Roman emperor after he defeated Licinius after that. He saw this vision in the sky. Now, there's some question about the vision, whether it was a dream or he actually saw it, but the basic story is he saw this vision in the sky of a cross. And he saw the words in Latin, "In this sign conquer." Well, he's on his way into battle. So he puts the cross on all the shields of his soldiers. And the cross was born into battle. And he won the battle. And so then he gave his allegiance to the God of the Christians, because the cross, of course, was the Christian sign. You can read about that story. That's a famous tale in the life of Constantine. So, let's go on talk a little bit more about Constantine here. I have some more material about him in Schaff's book, and just a few more points I want to make here, which brings out other issues at the time. It says, with the union of the church and the state. So this is what happened under Constantine. The church and the state, the church and the civil government became as one. They became the two arms of God to lead his people, both religiously and politically or civilly. But this union of church and state begins the long and tedious history of their collisions and mutual struggles for the mastery. So the emperor and the pope, as it comes down to, the two representatives the two phases of society, were always on a collision course because there's always that big gray area where both would claim authority. The state seeking to subject the church to the empire, the church to subject the state to the hierarchy, and both very often transgressing the limits prescribed to their power, in that word of the Lord, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Sometimes there's a lot of gray area, and the church always felt that in a matter of dispute, it had the superior authority because it was the spiritual authority, and so by nature it was a higher authority. From the time of Constantine, therefore, the history of the church and that of the world in Europe are so closely interwoven that neither can be understood without the other. On the one hand, the political rulers, as the highest members and patrons of the church, claimed a right to share in her government and interfered in various ways in her external and internal affairs, either to her profit or to her prejudice. On the other hand, the bishops and patriarchs, as the highest dignitaries and officers of the state religion, became involved in all sorts of secular matters and the intrigues of the Byzantine, Eastern Europe, government-centered court. This mutual mixture was more of injury than benefit to the church and to religion, and fettered her free and natural development. Excuse me. Of a separation of religion and politics, of the spiritual power from the temporal or civil, heathen antiquity knew nothing, because it regarded religion itself only from a natural point of view and subjected it to the purposes of the all-running state, the highest known form of human society. So human society for centuries had been involved with religion, and the religion was part of the state, which had been seen as the highest form of authority. So we can see this union of church and state that was initiated under Constantine to help unify the empire. This worked to the detriment of the church. It involved the church in all kinds of secular intrigues and affairs. And the civil authorities were interfering in the work of the kingdom of God, in the work of the church. So it was great to have, the Christians not persecuted anymore. But when they became the state religion, then this began a long road of corruption, the long road of corruption as far as the Christian church is concerned. It says, and this in point of fact took place first under Constantine and developed under his successors, particularly under Justinian, into the system of the Byzantine imperial papacy, or the supremacy of the state over the church. The state always tried to reign supreme over the church. Constantine once said to the bishops at a banquet that he also, as Christian emperor, was a divinely appointed bishop. So it was himself that said it, in other words, you see. He was a divinely appointed bishop. A bishop over the external affairs of the church. See, he wanted to control the church, while the internal affairs belonged to the bishops proper. And in this pregnant word, though indefinite and equivocal, in this pregnant word, he expressed the new posture of the civil sovereign toward the state in a characteristic, though indefinite and equivocal way. He made there a distinction between two divinely authorized episcopates or bishoprics, one secular and one imperial, one secular or imperial, corresponding to the old office of Pontifex Maximus, and extending over the whole Roman Empire, therefore ecumenical or universal, and the other spiritual or sacerdotal, divided among the different bishops. And so he considered himself a bishop, and accordingly, though not even yet baptized. He acted as a patron and universal temporal bishop of the church. He summoned the First Ecumenical Council for the settlement of the controversy respecting the divinity of Christ. He instituted and deposed bishops. There's Constantine. He's half heathen. And he's setting in bishops into the church and kicking bishops out, deposing them. And occasionally even delivered sermons to the people. But on the other hand, with genuine tact, he kept aloof from the Donatist controversy, which is a theological controversy, and referred to the bishops as the highest and last resort in purely spiritual matters. There was some, overlapping here. So, in general, from this time forth, the prevailing view was that God had divided all power between the priesthood and the kingdom, or between the bishops and the civil government. Between the priesthood, meaning the proper bishops, who consider themselves now, by this time, high priests, as priests of the Christian religion. Between the priesthood and the kingdom, or the imperial government, giving internal or spiritual affairs, especially doctrine and worship, to the former, to the bishops, and external or temporal affairs, such as government and discipline, to the civil ruler. But internal and external here vitally interpenetrate and depend on each other as soul and body, and frequent reciprocal encroachments and collisions are inevitable upon state-church ground. So now the church, is very immersed and involved in the state. Very immersed and involved in the state. And we see here a lot of conflict. Now, the new position of the church in the state. The new position now of the church, because of all this, now some particular facts, how the church relates to the state. By the late 4th century now, the Christian religion is the official state religion. And it was believed that it was the mission of the church to sanctify all of society. And even the government should yield to the church in matters of sanctification, wherever sanctification applied, even in the realm of a government. And the state should give itself over to the protection of the church and to the promotion of Christian principles and virtues like justice. But as I indicated now before, see that, in other words, the church was holding the government like spiritually responsible in its actions. Now, as I mentioned before, the Christianization of the state is very important, so you better write it down. The Christianization, quote unquote, of the state led to the secularization of the church. Secularization, of course, meaning the secular means pertaining to the world. So the Christianization of the state led to worldliness in the church. The state and the church married. Well, what's the Bible principle? Believers need to marry believers, right? Otherwise, very possibly the corruption of the believer. The people of Israel were not allowed to intermarry with the Canaanites, and when they did, God was very upset. And we see what happens. The deterioration of the religion of Israel was penetrated by heathenism. Well, it's the same thing. the church married the state married the church. And it was the church that became corrupted. The Christianization of the state led to the secularization or the worldliness of the church. Now, most of the empire was baptized only in water. I mean, not as a result of Christian conviction, and people knowing that by faith they've already been identified with the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. When Christianity is the state religion, then to be a citizen in good standing, not to be persecuted, you need to be a Christian. So people were just baptized. That made them Christians. And so baptism became the means of becoming a Christian. Very easy, convenient means. And that made them a citizen of the state. And so, but many times there's no evidence that there was any real conversion experience. So many people were Christian in name only, and not really born again. So most of the empire was baptized in water only, as opposed to being regenerated by the Word of God and by the Spirit of God. And so heathen customs, this is the open door to bring in heathen customs. And these heathen customs were adopted and given new names. And instead of the pagan gods being prayed to and looked to and worshipped, then great Christian characters that had gone on in the past, called the saints, well, then they began to be prayed to and looked to and trusted in. And so you have Christian idolatry beginning, that type of thing. And there's a whole history to all of this, but we just don't have time to go into it. The whole history of the origins of so many false, ungodly, and unscriptural practices that we find, even in Roman Catholicism today, that began in this period, when the church was baptized in name only, and so the heathen religion just came in certain areas, and heathen customs and so forth were just simply given a Christian name, or like a Christian dress. And so there are books written about that with historical references attached. So with all the so-called union between church and state, it was not a happy marriage. There was a lot of strife. And we'll see, of course, some of that strife as we go on. Now, the church did, from the time of Constantine, gain some worldly advantages, of course, by being married, as it were, to the state. And I want to read from Schaff's book here, his opening statement about that. Let me check it out here in just one moment. You can rest. Be glad that I've taken the book. I know that you're relieved. You can sit back and your knuckles can relax. Hallelujah. Let me see where we are here. The conversion of Constantine and the gradual establishment of Christianity as the religion of the state had, first of all, the important effect of giving the church not only the usual rights of a legal corporation, which she possesses also in America, and here without distinction of confessions or denominations, but at the same time the peculiar privileges which the heathen worship and priesthood had heretofore enjoyed. So the Christian church now gets all the prerogatives and all the rights in the government and society that the heathen religion had when it was the state religion. These rights and privileges she gradually secured either by tacit concession or through special laws of the Christian emperors as laid down in the collections of the Theodosian and Justinian codes. These were limited, however, as we must here at the outset observe, exclusively to the Catholic or Orthodox Church. So only the Catholic Church, that was becoming the Roman Catholic Church, only it had all these privileges. No other groups had these privileges. Just the Catholic, which is looked upon as the Orthodox Church. The heretical and schismatic sects, like the Montanists, people like that, without distinction, except the Arians. Except the Arians. We haven't spoken about the Arians yet, but their doctrine on the deity of Christ is an error. In fact, they don't believe in the absolute deity of Jesus Christ. The Arians came in with the heathen invasions. The heathens were evangelized by an Arian bishop, and so many of them became Arians. But some of the Arians became emperors, see. So the heretical and schismatic groups, without distinction, excepting the Arians during their brief ascendancy under Arian emperors, were now worse off than they had been before, and were forbidden the free exercise of their worship, even under Constantine, upon pains of fines and confiscations, and from the time of Theodosius and Justinian upon pain of death. So it was bad news for the Montanists. It was bad news for the Gnostics. I mean, it was bad news for the Ebionites. It was bad news for anybody who disagreed with Orthodox, with Catholic, with Roman Catholic teaching. It was bad news because this became the exclusive religion. Now, so basically, the new state religion acquired the same privileges that were previously enjoyed by the heathen religions. Number one. Now, what were some of these? Number one, get your pencils out. You had enough rest now, okay? So now get your pencil out. One, the exemption of the clergy from public duty. The exemption of the clergy from public duty. So the clergy did not have to get into military duty, nor did they have to pay taxes. So they're exempt from the military, and they're exempt from taxes. Now, we've seen some of that kind of civil exemption in some countries, even in modern times, but it goes back to this. This is where it's rooted. It goes back to this. Special civil exemptions as far as the church is concerned. All right, number two, the confiscated property, the property that the church that had been confiscated from the church, from the people, whatever, when the church was being persecuted, that was now restored at the expense of the government. Okay. Also, the church received the right to receive legacies. People could leave inheritances to the church. People could now leave money and land to the church. And because of this, the church became very, very wealthy. It came down to the fact that at one time, the church owned 1/10 of all the land of the Roman Empire. Because people gave it to them. Donated it to them. And so the churches became very, very wealthy, especially the church at Rome and the church at Alexandria, Egypt. They became very, very wealthy. Church at Rome and church at Alexandria, Egypt. By the 6th century, the churches in Rome had tremendous treasuries of gold and silver, a lot of silver vases and that kind of thing. Tremendous amount of money, tremendous amount of land. In Italy, Sicily, Syria, Asia Minor, and Egypt, the church was very, very wealthy. In fact, the church got greedy. You know, the more you have, the more you want. And we know that because we always need a bigger boat, right? So by 370, because the church got greedy, by 370, the Emperor Valentinian enacted a law against legacy hunting by the clergy. The clergy got so greedy that they were pressurizing people. They were pressuring people to leave them money and property. See? It got so bad that the emperor stepped in and he enacted a law prohibiting the clergy from pressuring people to leave money and land to the church. Now, thirdly, the clergy was supported by the government. The clergy was supported by the imperial treasury. So the clergy had their salaries paid by the government. And lastly here, and there were others too, but we'll just make it 4 here. Sunday was a civil holiday. So the observance of Sunday as a holiday, as a non-business day, that was sanctioned by law in deference to the Christian religion. So Sunday as a holiday, that was first enacted by civil law back in the 4th and 5th century. Now we come to the church and the barbarians. The church and the barbarians and the church and the barbarian invasions. I believe that we have a map to show the invasion of the empire by the different tribes of barbarians. Now, the German tribes, known as the Goths, that were east of the Rhine and north of the Danube, were being crowded by the Mongolian Huns east of them. So because of that pressure from the east, then they had to move south, these Goths. Now, there are 2 groups of Goths. You see your map up there, and you have a map in your syllabus. You have a map in your syllabus. But the Visigoths are the West Goths. And they were defeated. They defeated the Romans at the Battle of Adrianople. They defeated the Romans at the Battle of Adrianople. I'm not so sure that Adrianople is on the map to my left, and I don't see it, so I won't walk over there and point to it. No, makes sense. So, however, you can see on your map that the Goths defeated the Romans at the Battle of Adrianople in 378, and the Goths were later subdued in Adrianople. Now, Rome was sacked by the Goths under Alaric in 410. The Goths got into Rome. These barbarians, they sacked the city in 410. They came in with 250,000 men. The Visigoths, or the West Goths, eventually settled in Spain. So they went on and settled in Spain. The Vandals, from the east of the Rhine, eventually settled in North Africa. And the Ostrogoths, or the East Goths, took over the empire for a time. Then you had the Lombards, the Burgundians, and the Franks. And you have maps in your syllabus to show you these tribes and where they went and where they ended. So you want to check on those maps. But the Lombards, the Burgundians, and the Franks settled in France. And the Huns, under the famous Hun leader Attila, were defeated at Chalon, France in 451. So after the Huns were defeated in France, then they turned on Rome. And right now you have a picture on your screen of the Huns in action. And Rome was saved by the Bishop of Rome, Leo the Great, and we'll speak of him shortly. Bishop Leo the Great, who was really the first pope, as such, as we'll see. He went out and he met Attila face to face outside of Rome, and he stopped the city of Rome from being sacked. Well, eventually the empire fell to the barbarians. So that means that all the western provinces of the empire fell to the rule of the barbarian tribes. And but the church remained. So this happened in 476 A.D. In 476 A.D., the whole western region of the empire fell to the rule and the reign of the heathen, the barbarians. So that part of the empire was lost to Constantinople. And so the western part of the empire fell. The eastern part of the empire is still intact under the empire, but he lost the whole western half of his empire to the barbarians. But the church was there. Under the Bishop of Rome, the church was there. And now it becomes the mission of the church to educate the barbarians. See, now it becomes the mission of the church in the West to both educate, because they're a heathen, uncultured people, to educate and to evangelize and to bring the gospel to these barbarian people. And that was the great mission of the Roman medieval church, to evangelize and to educate the heathen hordes that took over the western part of the empire. Now, the downfall of the West under the crushing power of the barbarians, you see, it's like what was the emperor doing in Constantinople? Well, his empire was so far extended, he evidently just did not have the forces to combat these hordes that came down from the north. He just didn't have the forces to do it. And they might have gotten the jump on him, but they just overrun. So he just lost that part of his empire. And this downfall of the West by the barbarians in the late, which was in the late 5th century, 476 is it, that ushered in what we call the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages. Now, we heard of the Middle Ages, and we'll explain that. But this time of the downfall enters in, it ushers in the Middle Ages. So, at the beginning of the Middle Ages, the church was faced with Christianizing and educating the barbarian nations. And you have to know that, so get that pencil working. That was a twofold mission of the church in the Middle Ages, two main things it had to do: to Christianize and to educate the barbarian nations. Now, in 500 years, the new barbarian nations were Christianized. It took 500 years. So by 1000 A.D., by the year 1000, these people have been Christianized. Now I say Christianized. You know, we can't go into all that, but you know, it was not the pure New Testament gospel that most of us have grown to appreciate. There's a lot of Middle Age theology in there that we might disagree with, you know. But it was, you know, in name a Christian culture. And I'm sure some people were born again in spite of many other things. And it's difficult to judge all that. But these people were Christianized, quote unquote, you know, by the year 1000. by the year 1000. And this, in time, different distinct nations had been formed among the barbarians. They had formed different distinct nations. And so by 1500, each nation had its own culture, like Spanish, the French and the German, the Italians, Scandinavians. So they all had their own culture by 1500. Now, during the first 300 years after the barbarian invasions, so during the first 300 years after the empire fell in the West, the learning of the past, both secular learning and scriptural learning, the learning of the past was preserved by hand copying the old literary manuscripts. And this was particularly done by the monks in the monastery. Now we'll talk about monasticism, about the monks, about the religious, people who separated themselves from the world and lived a life of poverty, lived a life of celibacy, lived a life of obedience apart from the world to seek God on some kind of a higher plane. But as they did this, they also did other works that were beneficial to the church and beneficial to society. Not only agriculture, not only merciful works to the poor and the sick, but also very much they were involved in preserving the learning of the past. So while the barbarians took over the culture and nothing really seemed to happen for about 300 years, until the Christianization really began to bear fruit in the church's efforts among these people. These monks in the monasteries, who were among the most literate and educated of the people, they spent hours day in, day out, sitting down patiently, as your screen has shown a picture of, sitting down patiently, hand copying, page after page after page after page, book after book after book after book, including the scriptures. Including the scriptures. And we can say, well, there's a lot wrong with the Roman medieval church. But God used it to preserve the scriptures and to preserve education and to preserve civilization. Now, some of that was good, some was bad. But the main thing that we rejoice in is that all the civilization and its fruits of the past wasn't totally wiped out by the barbarians, because that was preserved through the literary copyists, through those who copied the literature of the past. And I say some of that was good, some of that was bad, but especially the scriptures. That during this time that the scriptures were kept, and because of the accuracy employed by these copyists, we know without a doubt the content of the original manuscripts of the scriptures. We don't have the originals anymore. They've blown away in the dust. But we have no doubt about their content, because of the magnitude of historical evidence we find in these copies that these monks had made. So the men in the monasteries, the monks, they preserved the learning of the past, and this was to provide the education for the barbarians when they were ready for it. They were not ready for 300 years. Imagine that. The church just had to get out and reach these people for 300 years. these barbarians just were barbarians. They were just uncultured people. We're not interested. But finally, it broke loose, and got interested, and so then culture and education began to spread out and come forth from the church to these people. Well, we'll continue in just a little bit with the conversion of the nations, who was responsible for bringing education and the gospel to the different nations of Europe.